I hiked like 5.5 miles this morning before you even woke up.
Great.
That's how we start.
Great.
I'm better than you.
How was it?
It was nice. My friend Suzanne and I go on early morning hikes once in a while. She called me or texted me last night and asked if I wanted to do another one. These are like starting during the nighttime hikes. Like we meet at the trailhead at 5:30 with headlamps, which I don't have, but fortunately she has two.
Yeah.
So we met at 5:30 in the pitch dark and hiked up in the dark. And then when we got to the top, the sun was starting to come up. It was cloudy, so it wasn't like a spectacular sunrise.
Right.
And then we hiked back down, and by 7:30, I'd done 5.5 miles and 88 floors.
Wow.
Yay.
Well, that's getting it started.
And after we record this, I'm going to go take a nap before I go teach.
Sounds smart.
Because I still went to bed at like midnight last night.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I was out with Jonathan Greshler band practice, so I didn't get home till late.
Right.
Late-ish.
Yeah. So we barely even saw each other yesterday.
Yeah, true.
Our opposite schedules are biting us lately.
Yeah, they have been.
Plus, I went to San Diego without you.
Yeah.
Before we go any further, you remember what we talked about?
No. What are we talking about?
This podcast is sponsored by Performance High Voice and Music Studio, where...
It sure is.
Where what happens? We were going to try to think of something funny.
Yeah, we were going to try to think of a slogan. Anyway, sponsored by Performance High Vocal Studio.
Voice and Music Studio, because we don't just do voice. We do instruments, recording, artist development, performances.
All of those things.
Instrument lessons, of course.
Owned by you. Mm-hmm. And it's one of the places that I work. It's the place I do artist development and performance coaching and all of that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. Which all is... Right. Yeah, there we go.
That's enough of that. We're just going to say... We'll think up some funnier sponsors in the future.
Yeah, we'll think of some funnier sponsors. Actually, we'll talk about war on drugs in a minute. I will say this podcast also sponsored by the concept of saxophone.
The concept of saxophone.
Because every time the saxophone player would get... We saw War on Drugs at Red Rocks, and every time the saxophone player would get put up on the Jumbotron thing, people all around us were cheering whether or not he was playing.
I couldn't hear it.
Yeah. But they would just see saxophone and cheer.
Woo!
So,
The concept of saxophone.
Sponsored by the concept of saxophone.
All right. Cool. So, starting with our weekend. Friday night, we had a gig with Cody at the Boulder Dinner Theater.
Love the Boulder Dinner Theater.
Mm-hmm. Great sound.
Always great sound, cool room.
It's a sit-down, have-dinner sort of place. We had backup singers for the first time. This was a cool opportunity. We had three singers from Performance High who have done showcases, but not like gigs, like non-showcase gigs. And it was their first gig for all of them. And they added so much. I could not believe how much energy and presence having them there added. Mm-hmm. It was really cool. I hope we can keep doing that.
Yeah, it was a ton. And a great way for people to get a chance to get some experience on stage, get to see what shows are like, hang out backstage.
Yeah.
Get familiar with soundcheck. Mm-hmm. By the way, not something I had thought about in a while. Good tip here. Always make sure you've got a song tucked away in your pocket to sound check with. It can be literally anything, but just something you can sing full voiced. Probably doesn't need to be more than 4 lines of it. You could just sing the 4 lines again. You're just sound checking after all.
You don't have to do the whole song. You just need to keep making noise.
Yeah.
You can't go 1, 2, 3. The sound guy's still turning knobs. Like he needs that sound input. He's adjusting things. You have to keep making noise.
And you do sing differently than you talk. So just talking into a microphone does not give them the information they need to adjust your voice correctly. also, importantly, it doesn't give them the information that they need to get your voice in your monitor very well. So if you, bottom line, just have a song ready to go for sound check.
Yeah.
You do Gypsy usually?
I usually do Gypsy because it sets my voice up well. So if I haven't warmed up before sound check, Gypsy is a great song that doesn't tighten my voice up. Once in a while I've done, Stand Back is not a good sound check song because it is 100%, it is full on, it's high volume.
Right.
But also it tightens up my voice. I need to be warm for that song. But Gypsy opens up my voice. So I'm like warming up my voice at the same time I do a sound check.
Right.
So it's kind of killing two birds with one stone.
Yeah. Bigger picture, we should probably all as performers have 5 or 10 songs ready to go off the top of our head, written down on our phone maybe if necessary, so that if somebody is like, hey, audition for this wonderful opportunity, you're not like, oh, I can't think of anything.
Yeah.
Which when you get put on the spot, you very often will. Everybody who's played music has had that experience of somebody being like, hey, play something, and you're like, well, now every song in the world is gone out of my head.
Yeah.
I currently know, at any one time, I probably know 100 songs.
Right, but the moment someone says, well, sing something for me, or play something for me.
Yeah, you're just like immediately like,
I don't know any songs.
I don't know any songs. So anyway, not to belabor that point, sorry we're going all over the place. So Friday, Boulder Dinner Theater, background vocalists, amazing energy. Cody did what he always does, he just kills.
Yeah. Even with you having to dash off stage.
I did get sick. I don't know whether I got a stomach bug or whether I ate something bad. But it wasn't great. It wasn't great.
So Cody was introducing the next song and you came over to me and you're like, I need to leave stage right now. And
yeah.
And so I said, hey, Cody, actually, we're going to do Uncomfortable now.
Luckily, there was a song to jump to, because that was not I would like to not be on stage. It was like...
it's counting down to...
Yeah. Not great. Also, unfortunately, not super new for me. Second set was nail biter. Which, it is what it is. That's going to happen sometimes. We've talked about it before. The one thing about performing is, and I've heard some rumblings about this changing a little bit. Some of the newer indie rock bands have lately started canceling shows more often based off of like, hey, look, we're just sick. And
Wet Leg canceled their appearance at Westwood.
That's exactly who I was thinking of.
Yeah, and I heard it was just because they exhausted from touring.
Yeah. And
that's a big deal. They were like headlining or close to headlining Westward.
Right. And I can see both sides of it.
Mm-hmm.
I know that I've personally done some pretty inhumane gigs. If you have enough of them over your life, you're just going to be sick some of the days. And the usual policy with gigs is always you had better be in the hospital or, and your entire family better have just died in a plane crash and you're in the hospital. There's no calling out otherwise.
You were lamenting not having a half stack that you could go duck behind and throw up.
Yeah.
You had to call that because you're used to that.
Yeah.
Convenience.
Yeah, that's a problem with not having big amps anymore. But I think it is changing a little bit, and I think that's good. Although in general, like, what are you gonna do? Show must go on.
Oh, I know. I mean, I don't know. I mean, think of the number of irate customers who have bought tickets, especially to a festival. You can't just like refund the ticket to a concert, which happened a lot during COVID.
Right.
Or, you hang on to the ticket and the concert's going to happen in another year. Like, if the headliner to a festival doesn't show up, that festival organizer, how are they going to compensate the people who paid to see that band and other bands?
And with bigger stuff like that, there's a lot of money on the line. Even with Boulder Dinner Theater, they couldn't, once they've got the show open and they've got staff there and everything else, that's a tremendous loss to be like, hey, we have to refund, we can't do the show. Even for a small place, but especially a festival. It's a tough thing, but all in all, just fine.
So anyway, then at 4:00 in the morning, I got up to go to the airport and go hang out with family in San Diego.
Right.
And
which I hated to miss.
Oh, I know. You were supposed to go, but,
I was supposed to go. It just wouldn't have been fun, though. I was not terribly ill, but I would not have had fun.
And we didn't want to bring that illness to the whole family.
Yeah, that's the other thing. You never know. You never know. Yeah. So, anyway, sounds like you had a good trip. You were saying that it was... It
was kind of condensed this year. Normally I go for several days. We go for several days or a week. And this time I just went for 2 days because we didn't have the time. But it was great. I kind of just made the rounds. You know, my cousins, Alan and Abby, AJ and Abby, they were staying in one house with their kids. And my mom and her husband and my aunt and uncle, Bill and Jeannie, were staying in the house that I stayed in on the beach. And then over in a different house, there was my cousins, Billy and Jonathan, with their kids. Right. So and it was all very close together. So I just kind of kept circulating. And we spent time on the bay, and it was all good. But, you know, speaking of, you said you should always have a song ready to break out when someone requests. You know, when you're a singer and you go to any kind of gathering and people find out you're a singer, they're always like, oh, sing something for me. Or I thought you were going to sing. It's like, no, I'm not going to just like stand here around the dinner table and break out a song. I hate that. I don't hate that people ask, but I'm like, I'm not going to do it. Yeah, no, And some people... and we just don't doing that.
And it's also fine. Kind of conversely, I had this conversation with somebody the other day where, like, we don't do that. Like, I don't sing. I play guitar mainly. And you sing, and people will sometimes occasionally be like, oh, you guys should do something. And it's also fine to politely decline. Like, I in the bigger picture, I feel pretty strongly about this. We're just talking about, you know, you're around friends and family. Who cares? You know, but also, you know, like we've said before, we don't really jam. And the bigger picture thing is, if you can't do your real show or your perform up to, you know, where you know, this is what we do, you know, a certain level of performing, and that's not like talking about like, oh, there's not enough people here or some thing like that. It's just like, I can't do
it. The space. Like, I've never really dove into why I have such a visceral reaction to being asked to sing on the spot. But I think it's because for me, truly performing is a different space. It's a different headspace. It takes energy to get into. I'm not the kind of person who's just walking around singing like la 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 all day long, and there are lots of singers who do, and there's nothing wrong with that.
No, there's no.
And there's nothing wrong with casually performing. I mean, that's what music has always been in a human sense. So we're the odd ones out for sure.
Right.
But for me, it's like if someone says, "Oh, just sing me something," like I'm not physically or mentally ready. Like, I'm not warmed up.
That's my big thing. Yeah.
I'm not mentally in the space. I'm not going to impress you with this off the cuff thing. In my opinion, I'm not going to impress you. Like, I want to be like ready to go, amped up, like have the context, like have some accompaniment, in my opinion. Right. I don't love singing a cappella by myself. I mean, in a group, great, but a cappella, it's just, I don't know. It feels like, I also don't like being the center of attention, which is an odd thing for a front person to say.
But it is very different. So when you're in a room, it feels a little weird.
It's like, that's not what people came for.
Right.
That's not why people are here.
Yeah.
I'm here to connect with you and have a conversation about like what's going on with your job and how are your kids and I don't know.
Yeah, I know. It feels
weird.
Well, and I to put a fine point on it, I recently thought of that because I was talking to a performer that I'm helping through the process of releasing their album. And they were talking about being afraid to do interviews and afraid to pursue interviews, you know, locally and et cetera, kind of in their little niche of whatever. And part of their fear was, oh, they're going to ask me to play something. And if I go do an interview, they're going to be like, oh, well, play a song. And they're a performer who's a composer, but also an improviser, kind of not a traditional performer in some ways, and I was explaining to them, it is absolutely fine to politely decline and just say, I don't do that. You know, I sorry, like, you know, That's not what I do. I need X, Y, and Z to do my best thing, or I need to be in the mental space or whatever.
Yeah.
I'm not an on the spot. Not that necessarily someone doing an interview is going to be like, hey, prove you can play. Like, here's a piano.
Yeah.
Like, that, of course, is not going to happen. But at the same time, you're fine to set your own parameters for things.
And on the other side, it's perfectly fine to ask a musician to sing or perform. It's fine. We're not saying like people are wrong for asking us to perform. We're examining like, why are we the weirdos who don't want to when this is what we do with our lives?
I guess that's part of it. And when I'm saying it's fine to decline, I'm talking more in a career sense, where you're out there trying to do your career thing. We've had the talk with projects that we've even been in where, it's fine to say, like, we don't do that. We need a stage to perform. We can't perform just on the floor. And if we do, we just won't be able to give you your best show. It's not that we're too good for anything. It's just we won't be able to give you the real show. And so we shouldn't do it at all. Because if you see this halfway thing, you're not going to understand what it is. And in a career sense, it's fine to stick up for yourself and say, I can't do my job under these circumstances.
Right, and it's not a diva thing.
It's not at all.
It's a quality of the product.
Of the product, yeah. And there is such a thing as putting, giving out a wrong first impression, or that's something somebody said to me early on in No Address, like basically, in a nutshell, if you guys keep doing shows like this, you're never going to get to the next level, because people are going to go, oh, I thought they were a big deal. Why are they playing that kind of thing? They're supposed to be a national band. They're still doing these kinds of things. I guess they're not really a national level band.
Yeah, it's tricky because you do have to work your way up.
Because you do have to work your way up, but there is a point where you have to go, no, we have to say no to some things, not because we're too good or whatever. It's just that it's part of the impression of, it's sort of like, at some point, if you're going to be a respected, whatever it is, doctor, there are things that, if you're like, wow, he's sweeping the floor after like surgery, like maybe he's not that great of a doctor.
Oh, yeah.
Bad analogy. Again, I don't mean that you're better than anybody. Just something I'd run into a couple times recently that I was thinking about. It is interesting why we have that aversion to kind of being put on the spot.
Yeah. And
I think it is, you don't want to be the center of attention.
When that's not the situation.
When that's not the situation.
Like, when we first moved into the Broomfield location, and I went to go meet my landlady at her bridge tournament to pick up a check from her for soundproofing. It was this huge room, like in... I don't know. There were 30 or 40 tables of women, mostly women, playing bridge. And I found her at the far end. And she was like, oh, this is my new tenant, Adrienne. She's a singer. Hey, Adrienne, why don't you sing for us? And I'm like, right now, right here, no.
Yeah.
That's not what people are here for. I could just imagine like half of the room kind of quieting down and being like, what is going on over there? And half the room being like...
I think some of it is a time and place thing. There's a time and place for a play or a movie or you don't necessarily want to get up in the morning and eat a steak and a baked potato. That's kind of an evening meal, and it just doesn't feel, which is something I say about some of these outdoor shows. And this is just me.
It is just you.
It's just me. I love nothing more in the world than rock and roll. The idea that someone would want to hear rock and roll at 10 a.m. in the morning blows my mind. I don't get it. Why?
Especially live outdoors.
Live outdoors in the sunshine. It just seems a weird thing to... it's just me. Well, we're all over the place this time.
We needed to talk about the War on Drugs show.
Yeah.
So we went to Red Rocks to see War on Drugs on Monday night. And we had some thoughts about the set. It was interesting to observe. Of course, we're always sitting back like, no. We are enjoying it too. We love the War on Drugs. And
probably my favorite band and they've been doing it for longer, but to kind of come to, prominence or become known in the last 10 years, I would say maybe my favorite. just a phenomenal band, phenomenal songwriter. I don't think Red Rocks was the best venue. I love that they got to do Red Rocks, and I love that they're at that level. That's amazing. These are guys who spent 10, 20 years in a van touring tiny. He was talking about 2009, not much more than 10 years ago, playing at the High Dive, which is a very cool venue, but is also, you know, a couple hundred people. Yeah. It's a divey, you know, indie rock bar. And they've come a long, long way in that time. And that's great. Maybe it was the outdoors. That was one thing. I felt like it would have hit you differently in a packed theater. Mm-hmm.
And it's not that Red Rocks wasn't packed, but it was pretty packed, actually.
It was packed.
We got a seat about 2/3 of the way up, which probably affected our experience quite a bit. Because there was some wind, and so the sound was kind of buffeting around.
That was the weirdest thing. Yeah,
the sound was weird just because the wind was moving the air.
It was like if you move your hand in front of a fan, and it changes the sound of it.
Yeah, yeah. And then, of course, it wasn't as immersive visually as it would be if we were closer. But then we had some observations about the set list.
Yeah, right. I don't know where to dive in there. I mean, one thing more or less, there was one, they kept the hits till the very end.
Really backloaded
set, which is fine, and I totally get it. It just gave it less of a peaks and valleys feel to me.
The songs themselves don't really have peaks and valleys, first of all.
Right.
Not much, which is part of what I love, but as a live experience, it was very much just like a kind of one tone sort of feeling.
Right.
It's a feeling I love, but it's just one of them. And then having a bunch of those songs one after another felt like after a while I was getting a little bored.
It was a little hard to focus. And that's what I was thinking. If you were in a packed theater type thing and you were dancing and you had your hands up, but
and the light was immersive.
Right, and the lights, you were just in the show, but sitting further back because, again, it was really packed. I've not been to Red Rocks a bunch, but there were more people there for that show than the other shows I've been to. And, you know, you were kind of far away and you were sitting, and then there weren't peaks and valleys. You pointed out it's part of their sound, but every single person, phenomenal band, but every single person was playing full on every single time. Like, I don't think anybody paused for a bar, maybe other than song intros. And so it was an incredibly full sound, but it was an incredibly full sound the whole time.
Right.
And I felt like it was kind of, again, probably would hit you differently live in a room, and it felt louder. The sound was great, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't that kind of like you can feel it shaking your body.
Yeah, well, it would have been if we were closer.
If we were closer, right.
Or in a closed room.
Yeah.
So anyway, it was interesting to...
But on the other hand, what do you do? You know, I mean, as far as the set.
Yeah. And who are we? You know, we're here like, you know, having...
Listen, they're playing Red Rocks.
I know, we have not.
We did Boulder Dinner Theater.
I know.
So
it's all, you know, we know who we are critiquing this stuff.
Yeah.
You know, still, you know, as audience, we are being the audience, and you know, we have a little bit more insight than some audience members might have to what's making something work or not work. You had some observations about how this works for them because they're totally unconcerned with how it goes over. Basically, you know, there's this sense that they're playing their songs. There's no like walking around, like working the area. There's no stagecraft of like, I'm going to be over here and sing to these people over here. I'm going to be over here. And no, they're just doing what they do. They're all in their places, making their music. And if you've come to see them, then you are a fan of theirs, and you either buy in or you walk. There's such a purity to that. Like, I'm going to sing what it makes me feel good to sing. I'm going to play on guitar what it makes me feel good to play, and I'm not going to worry if it's long
or drawn out or even boring. I don't care. I'm going to do it because it feels good to me to do, which is wonderful. I mean, and obviously it's worked for them.
Right.
A really hard road. I don't know for a fact that that's how they feel, but like if that is how they feel, what a wonderful,
that's
thing.
Kind of how it came across in a sense.
Right. And
They're just doing their thing.
Right. And it's interesting how it's another example of how there's all these different ways that you can be an artist and you can be a performer and you can exist on all these different levels. And I don't mean to pass any judgment. I think it's all equally valid. It's interesting that you mentioned being in the audience because I've said several times over the past week with prospective clients, that's really where I come from as a coach and as someone who thinks about this stuff, is so much from the audience perspective. And it's sort of not just from being at shows, but from always being the side guy and always sort of performing, but also watching the lead person perform.
And you're watching how it lands. You're
watching the audience.
You're watching both sides. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of in this weird in the middle point. And the performer really should be so invested in what they're doing that they, but for me, it's just years and years of kind of watching the audience and and kind of reacting to what singers do as an audience. I'm sort of part of the audience in a weird way. And that's really where I come at a lot of those things, is thinking like, how is this landing and how does the relationship go? I'm less of a technique I work on techniques and stuff, but a lot of it's that just gut reaction of like, as an audience, this is how this is affecting me. And I trust it because I've seen it a few thousand times. And honestly, that was one of my biggest learning experiences, was actually running sound kind of a lot in Jacksonville. And it was so interesting when you're running sound because you're just sitting at the back of the room and you're watching the show, and I'm not even being a part of the show. I'm just watching and all the things that you think about, like, wow, like you'll see somebody do a Friday and a Saturday and you're like, wow, they murdered it Friday. And then now, not so much. Like what's happening? What's different? Or they had them and then they lost them, or they didn't have them and then they got them. How did that happen, and when did that happen, and why? That's sort of maybe when I started getting really fascinated with specifically that kind of thing. But back to Red Rocks, phenomenal venue. I mean, just going there is. We were there when we played with Cody last weekend before, and they opened it to the public at noon or whatever, and all these tourists that were clearly from they were not American were like piling in to go walk around and stuff, and I totally get it. Like it's a tourist destination on its own. Forget the show. And it's so amazing that they made it a public venue. We were saying when we were walking up, I mean, that could have just been on somebody's family's land, and it could be some private thing that it's amazing that they made it a public thing and such a great venue. Well,
do we have any lessons or takeaways? I think they might have been scattered throughout.
They were scattered. So we talked about always having a song in your pocket for sound check, and probably having a few things that you can pull out and do at any one time,
and then refusing to do so,
and then refuse to do it. So have them written down, and then tell people no. So that's a good takeaway. I think a takeaway was, that difference between a band that's just playing purely for themselves, and if other people like it, great. If not, great. They're just having a great time. I think just even thinking about that and thinking about that possibility is kind of
there's definitely
cool
not
takeaway.
One right way
not at all.
Play a show, depending on your goals. I do feel like there is sort of one right way to do a show that is intended to bring in people who aren't already bought in.
I would agree.
Like we saw with the Killers and the way we design our sets.
Right.
But if you're just like, we're here, our fans are our fans, and we're going to play our songs, period. Like, not even worry about it. That's, I mean, who are we to say?
Who are we to say? And that's a great thing. I almost think that's maybe the only guaranteed success, and you might disagree with this, is I think a couple conditions here. If you're doing what you literally in your heart of hearts think is the coolest thing in the world, absolutely the coolest thing in the world, that is like you're making the music that you want to hear, and you just never give up and stop doing it, you're gonna be successful on some level. Given the third thing, that you actually try hard and work hard and make sure it's good. Yeah, right. But then again, that becomes the problem. Do you have the ability, or the ability, or the personal inside ability to slug that out for 20 years until it does catch on or build up enough?
With no promise that it ever will.
With no promise that it ever will, because, anyway, yeah, that was an interesting thing. And I guess, the last thing was just sticking up for what you need to do the job. That wasn't something we saw this week personally, but we got on the topic, and I've dealt with it a little with some clients, and sometimes you just do have to say, no, I can't, I can't do the work that up to my level, with this situation.
Yeah, you can't hire the Hamilton cast to play in your block party with, no side, no stage, no wings, and no props.
And no sound system. They probably shouldn't do that gig.
That's an exaggerated example.
All exaggerated. We're out of sorts. This has been a crazy week.
It's already Wednesday.
It's already Wednesday. Yeah, it's unbelievable. Well, let's go ahead and cut this one off so that you
and get it out today.
You're so great for doing that.
When are you going to start your podcast?
Yeah, I need to. Yeah. Well, stuff would slow down a little. It never will. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Anyway, so thank you guys for listening. Blah, blah, blah. We will blah, blah, blah at you next week.